Hello, and welcome to the online version of Pennsylvania's Alcohol Highway Safety School. My name is Sam Monosmith, and I'll be working with you as your course instructor as you complete all the modules that are part of this educational program. The educational program that you'll be completing is the same educational program that other people will be completing in a live version in county programs throughout the state. Obviously, the only difference between this experience and the experience that they're going to have is that you will be completing it as an online course. In Pennsylvania, everyone that is arrested for driving under the influence must complete the Alcohol Highway Safety course. Preventing deaths and injury due to impaired driving has been an ongoing goal in Pennsylvania countermeasures. Education is a key component of this effort. In this educational course, we're going to be talking about information that is relevant to DUI, as well as information that relates to drugs in the body and how drugs affect the driving skill. DUI is both a health and legal problem. In the past, these two concerns related to DUI have been addressed separately. Punishment and penalties associated with DUI have been in place for several decades, but it's also recognized that driving under the influence is a serious public health problem. So Pennsylvania has combined both the legal system and the health system into a comprehensive countermeasures system that attempts to address both the legal concerns associated with driving under the influence and the health concerns that can be associated with substance abuse and substance misuse. The health legal system in Pennsylvania is an integrated approach. It consists of 5 major areas. Those areas are law enforcement, adjudication, education, treatment, and public information and education. Law enforcement is obviously police officers out there enforcing the laws of the Commonwealth related to DUI. Adjudication involves the court systems and applying the law to individual cases when people get arrested for driving under the influence. And it also involves the probation process that is required as a result of getting arrested for a DUI. The education course is an attempt to raise awareness about the dangers of driving under the influence, and if necessary, Pennsylvania does make treatment programs and treatment services available to people who can benefit from those types of programs. Those 4 elements really involve people that get arrested for driving under the influence. The public information and education piece of Pennsylvania's health legal system is an attempt to reach out to the community and the general public and make them aware of the dangers of driving under the influence in an attempt to try and prevent DUIs from occurring. I'd like to give you an overview of the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about in the Alcohol Highway Safety School course. The course is actually subdivided into 5 different modules. Module 1 will really begin to focus on the nature and scope of the DUI problem. We'll also be talking about DUI law in Pennsylvania. Module 2 is really going to focus on drugs and the human body, and we're going to talk about some basic information about how drugs affect the human body when you use them, and then how the body processes those drugs. After we get a little bit of an understanding about drugs and how they affect the human body, then we're going to apply that to the driving skill. So, very important part of our discussion will be if you take or ingest drugs and alcohol, they have an effect on many tasks and skills that are associated with driving. And so we want to take a look at how drugs actually affect the driving skills. In Module 3 also, we'll expand that look or examination of how drugs affect the driving skill into a broader examination of effects of a DUI arrest on your personal life, your family life, your friends, and job. We recognize that a DUI arrest has many conditions of things that you must comply with and many things that you must do to satisfactorily complete this course. But we also recognize that getting a DUI has a broader effect on your life, and we want to examine that a little bit. Next, we're going to shift to a topic of problem drug use and addiction. We like to use the DUI arrest as a potential warning sign. And for some individuals, they get arrested for driving under the influence, and drug and alcohol use is not a significant or serious problem in their life. What we want to do is give you the opportunity to take a look at not only the DUI arrest, but also in a more broad context, what role are drugs and alcohol use playing in my life, and could I benefit from other kinds of services other than educational programs. And then finally, we really want to give you the opportunity to really come up with a realistic action plan to prevent DUI from happening again. So those are the 5 modules. Each of the 5 modules will have some subsessions broken down, and we'll go through each of those subsessions and each of the modules in this order. Let's begin our discussion of Module 1. And one of the first topic areas that we're going to talk a little bit about really focuses on the dangers of DUI. Arresting people for driving under the influence, we realize that it does cause hardships. Getting arrested for a DUI is serious. The penalties that are associated with getting arrested for a DUI are very serious. So it's important to recognize that the problems and dangers associated with driving under the influence are also very serious. So having people arrested for driving under the influence and having them go through penalties and educational courses is not something that's taken lightly. It's important that you recognize that DUI is a very serious problem, and to help represent that problem a little bit, or to help clarify that problem a little bit, I want to share with you some crash-related alcohol facts, drug driving related facts that take place in Pennsylvania. Please understand that in Pennsylvania, drinking and driving is a very important safety issue. In 2012, alcohol-related crashes increased, and they increased from 11,956 from 11,805 related crashes in 2012. Also, alcohol-related deaths. Fortunately, this is some good news and some positive information. Alcohol-related deaths decreased in 2012 from 428 in the year before down to 408. So just looking at these simple facts, it is apparent that drinking and driving is occurring in Pennsylvania. and there are serious outcomes associated with drinking and driving. So people are not only being involved in crashes, but people are also dying on Pennsylvania's highways as a result of DUI. Specifically in 2012, alcohol-related deaths were 31% of the total traffic deaths on Pennsylvania's highways. And that's nearly the same as in 2010, 2011, 2009, 2010, and 2011. We'd like to see the percentage of deaths associated with driving under the influence continue to decline. Some other interesting facts about DUI and its impact in Pennsylvania. 404 people died in alcohol-related crashes in 2012, and 90% of alcohol-related occupant deaths, and that includes both the driver and the passenger, were in a vehicle that was driven by someone who was driving under the influence. 74% were the drinking drivers themselves. Interestingly enough, 75% of the drinking drivers in traffic crashes were male. 74% of alcohol-related crashes were during the hours of darkness and usually on weekends. And this is a pretty typical pattern for DUI-related crashes, and it may be it may be similar to the circumstances that led up to your arrest for driving under the influence. Generally, people drink a little bit more on the weekends, Friday, Saturday night, so what happens is you leave either a home or an establishment where you've been drinking, and it's often early in the morning, typically after midnight, and so it's very obvious at that time in the early morning of Saturday and Sunday that we have more drinking drivers on the road than other times of the week. On average, each day, 33 alcohol-related traffic crashes occur in Pennsylvania, and on average, each day, one person is killed in an alcohol-related traffic crash in Pennsylvania. Also, on an average day, 24 people in Pennsylvania were injured in an alcohol-related traffic crash. By looking at these statistics, it's obvious that driving under the influence is a serious problem in Pennsylvania, and it's important that we have the countermeasure system in place that we do to try and address this problem as well as prevent death and injury and property damage associated with driving under the influence.
Driving. Is it a right or a privilege? We've been talking about the facts of Pennsylvania's DUI problem and the legal definitions of what it means to be driving under the influence. Is driving one of your rights as a Pennsylvania citizen, or is it a privilege granted to you by the Commonwealth? It's an exploration of your attitudes and your beliefs. How has your perspective changed on this issue since your DUI? Again, take your time, pause the session, and take about 15 minutes to write down your thoughts.
Okay, and continuing with Module 1, I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about DUI law in Pennsylvania. And obviously, because you've been arrested for driving under the influence, you've become somewhat familiar with the laws of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as they relate to driving under the influence. There are some important aspects of DUI law in Pennsylvania that I think it's worthwhile that we spend a little bit of time talking about them, and so that you have a good understanding about some of these aspects of DUI law in Pennsylvania. So, one important aspect of the DUI law in Pennsylvania is called per se level of intoxication. And per se means literally in and of itself. So what the law in Pennsylvania says is that the prosecution does not need to prove alcohol or illegal drugs rendered you incapable of safe driving. Driving under the influence per se for alcohol is defined as a blood alcohol concentration of 0.08. So under Pennsylvania law, if you take the chemical test, blood or breath test for as a result of being pulled over for a DUI, and your blood alcohol concentration registers 0.08, that is evidence that you are driving under the influence in Pennsylvania. Now, you can also be arrested in Pennsylvania for driving under the influence of drugs other than alcohol. And for drugs other than alcohol, and these drugs usually fall in the category of over-the-counter drugs, illegal drugs, and prescription drugs. If any of those drugs have the ability to affect driving skills and render a person incapable of safe driving, you can be arrested and convicted for DUI as a result of being under the influence of those substances. And in Pennsylvania, for those substances other than alcohol, any amount of those drugs that you have in your system, you can be convicted for driving under the influence. So per se level simply means that the issue here is not whether you were drunk or not drunk. The issue is did you have a sufficient amount of alcohol and the presence of other drugs in your bloodstream, and if so, Pennsylvania law says that in and of itself is sufficient for a conviction for driving under the influence. Again, the per se level of intoxication in Pennsylvania is 0.08, and it's very, very important that we understand the role of BAC in Pennsylvania DUI law. Pennsylvania has established a grading of offenses and penalties that are based on your blood alcohol concentration and if you've had any prior arrests for driving under the influence. In Pennsylvania, we have a three-tiered approach, and again that is broken down by BAC. And the first tier is incapable of safe driving, and that's a blood alcohol concentration from 0.08 to 0.99. The second tier, or what is called high BAC or high impairment, is a BAC of 0.10 but less than 0.16. And then the highest tier for penalties as a result of BAC in Pennsylvania is at a blood alcohol concentration of 0.16 or above. So there are increased penalties and mandatory assessments for drug and alcohol treatment for offenders, and the penalties and the experiences that you have as you move through the process of dealing with a DUI arrest are influenced by how high your blood alcohol concentration was at the time of your arrest. The penalties using this three-tiered system can be somewhat complicated. You have on your screen a chart that actually breaks down the actual penalties associated with the three tiers in Pennsylvania. And the important thing is not to try and read all the penalties specific under each of the tiers, but to recognize you can see the blood alcohol concentrations, and you can see that the penalties actually increase as the blood alcohol concentrations increase in each of the 3 tiers. It's also important to recognize that number of DUI arrests can affect the penalties that you receive for DUI in Pennsylvania. So if you're a multiple offender and you're in a low BAC tier, that's going to affect the penalties that you receive. So if you're a second-time offender, even though you might be in the low tier, your penalties are going to be more severe than someone who is not a repeat offender. Pennsylvania law also has implied consent, and what that means is that when you're a licensed driver in Pennsylvania, it is implied that if you are requested, if a reasonable request is made by a police officer who suspects you've been driving under the influence, if they request a chemical test, that you will comply with that test and submit to the chemical testing. If you fail to take the test when requested, it'll result in a 12-month license suspension in Pennsylvania. And as a result of the refusal, you also will receive the penalties that are at the highest level of the tier system for penalties in Pennsylvania. I don't think there is a good reason to refuse the chemical test, and the reason why I say that is if you're not under the influence of alcohol or other controlled substances, the chemical test can actually prove that you weren't driving under the influence.